Welcome, everybody, to a special interview. Joining me today is Paul Hederer, who is the designer of the highly anticipated, at least by me, upcoming title from VUCA Simulations called 1916 Prelude to Blitzkrieg. Paul, thanks for joining us today. And why don't you start out by telling us what exactly the game will cover in terms of World War I and the historical campaign, and maybe give us a brief synopsis of how that historical campaign went down.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show, by the way. I wanted to thank you also because you touched on the game last year in I think it was late fall or so, when I had put it aside for a while. And your show resulted in a lot of people contacting me and volunteering to be playtesters. And that was part of the reason why Patrick and I decided to reform the team and push ahead. It was that encouragement that we got, and I wanted to thank you for that. It was really your show. I had so many people tell me, "Oh, I saw Ardwulf and I saw your game, and I want to help out." So thanks very much.
That is possibly one of the highest compliments I could possibly receive. That something I said actually made a little bit of a difference toward the completion of a game that I was excited about when I first heard about it back in the day. Of course. Well, let you answer the remainder of the first questions before I start asking more.
I will show. I have a couple of visuals here that I think will help a little bit with a little kind of explaining what you said. You asked about the scope and everything. This is the map of the area. It's quite large. It's about 43,000 square miles. It is a huge area. I think most people don't realize, or it's not common knowledge, that the Romanian part of the Eastern Front was as long as all of the rest of the Eastern Front. They basically were of equal lengths. So the game covers the initial from August until December 1916, the Romanian initial offensive into Transylvania, and then the counteroffensive by the Central Powers that kind of resulted in their demise. I can just show you kind of size-wise here. I put this together because people ask me a lot about how big it is. This is a little bit older version of the map, but what I did here is I superimposed it with the game from SPI's Brusilov offensive. And it is quite striking. It gives you a really good idea of how much larger the area is, even than this rather large offensive that they launched later in the war. And they match right up. They match perfectly. So it's kind of interesting how it looks. This is the initial plan by the Romanians. So this is basically the game. This is the thesis behind it, the theme. They had a plan called Plan Z. And the idea was in steps, to take Transylvania. And then once they had consolidated in this area, then they wanted to push on to Budapest. It didn't work out really well because, unfortunately for them, von Mackensen really was probably one of the most competent generals of the war, was down here commanding Army Group Mackensen, which included the Bulgarian Third Army. And they launched an immediate offensive into the Dobrogia area, which is this area here, and threw off the plans. The Romanians basically panicked. They halted the offensive and sent troops to the south, and this began to really dislocate their plans. And so that's, in a nutshell, what the game covers. Again, from August to December of 16, the initial offensive by the Romanians, and then the counteroffensive by the Central Powers. You also have the Russians up in the north here, and they're a very big presence in the game later on.
This sounds fascinating. Of course, World War I is an undergamed topic, and in many respects, less so than it used to be, I'm happy to say. This series, correct me if I'm wrong, did start out as using the Michael Resch GMT system, and that's when I first heard about it. I'm like, oh, cool. These games look awesome. I'll definitely buy this. And then it kind of stopped for a while.
Yeah, it was a decision that wasn't taken lightly at all, and it was kind of long in coming as well. So Patrick contacted me back in 23, in late
This is
23.
Patrick Gephardt of VUCA
I
Simulations.
beg your pardon. Yeah, yeah, Patrick of VUCA, as I call him. And he had seen some posts I had put online about the game, and he basically just asked me, could I publish this? And we talked and got to know each other a little bit, and I really liked what I heard, and I said yes. So at that point, I was still using Mike's system, and we were testing it at that point. And as it went on, I had a local friend who was playing Knock Paris, and he was absolutely crazy for it. I didn't have a copy at that time, but he just kept telling me how much he loved it. And I think it kind of planted a seed. And so I started looking at it, and I looked at the rules. I talked to Patrick about it, and I said, hey, what if we saw what we could do with this? And of course, this was appealing to him because Knock Paris is basically a house system for VUCA, which makes sense. And we ended up, I made a small scenario. It's called the Bulgaria attack scenario. It covers this southern front here. Very small, maybe 60 counters, just a really small map, and played it over a weekend and was really happy with the results. And I thought, this probably isn't a bad idea. I found the system to be very accessible, which is something that Mario, that's my gaming friend, had said was he found it very accessible and easy to understand. So I made the rather momentous decision at that point to switch the systems. And that's really why I did it. I was quite happy with what I had with Mike's system. It had been tested quite a few times at VenCon. That's a convention in Venice with some Italian friends, and Andrea Brusati, who's also a really good designer, had helped out a lot. And so I made the switch, and it's turned out well. I'm really happy with what we've ended up with. And so I hope that answers your question, because it was a big question when I switched. I got a lot of people who were, some were happy, some were upset, some were angry. And I had to really explain it, and I hope I did it well.
Well, having just tried Mike's system with 1914 Twilight, and these literally, we just spent an entire week playing it, meaning I spent an entire week getting kicked around. That's a cool system. I really liked my experience in that, and I have not yet tried Knock Paris. So are there any features of that system that you felt are going to work exceptionally well for your 1916 Romanian situation?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because you bring up a really interesting point, and this is something that Mike and I talked about forever. I think we've been talking back and forth for well over 10 years, and we've actually met a couple times. I play tested OAO one time with him live, and he actually stopped by and had lunch with me in Zurich a couple of years ago. That was really nice. What works in 1914, and when I say 1914, I don't mean the series, I mean the year. What works for 1914 at the beginning of the war does not work well in many aspects for 1916. And this was something that Mike kind of, I don't want to say warned me about, but kind of brought to my attention when I first started this project. Was he said, I'm not sure that system will translate completely to 1916. And he was absolutely right. It really, even with his system, it took a lot of changes. And with Bertrand Mounier's system, he was very generous, very forthcoming. I remember I talked to him via email, and basically it was like 25 minutes later, he dumped all of his spreadsheets and everything to me and said, here you go. I mean, and as a designer, that's a really big deal when somebody shares all that work with you. What I like about the system, what I like about Knock Paris is I feel it's a bit simpler in some ways. It's hard to compare the systems, but I feel kind of uniquely qualified to do it because I've literally designed 2 games using this system. They're both like paintings, and it's like the designer has decided to paint the war in a different way. And What I liked about, or what I like very much about Knock Paris is I feel the combat system is a bit faster. It's a little bit more streamlined. Um, the what you're keeping track of in Twilight in the East is extensive, and
Mhm.
actually you talked about that in your video about playing it, about keeping track of the efficiency level. I think it
Mhm.
is. I beg your pardon. I think you said it's morale. I think everybody always calls it morale, but it's really this level is it's a bit of an overhead, and it is not for everybody, for sure. I played with some people, and I even tried to get my local gaming buddy to play, and it just didn't quite catch with him. But every system's got its fans, you know. So I like the combat system. I like the movement system. I like his CRT. I think he's got one of the most innovative and interesting CRTs I've seen since I've been playing games with this idea that you can literally roll yourself off of a certain odds column onto another one is something I've never seen before.
Hmm.
And yeah, uh, and the way that he deals with terrain, that everything, they're all die roll modifiers. You put everything together in kind of a big package, and then you roll. Um, I don't know. I found it again very accessible, and it plays fast.
Hmm. That's a
Yeah,
big selling point for a lot of folks.
sure.
So what was it about this particular campaign, Romanians against the Austro-Hungarians and Germans in 1916, that drove you to design a game on the topic?
It's a really good question, and it's going to sound weird when I give you the answer. So one of my inspirations, and I'm gonna go ahead to this slide here. One of my inspirations when I was growing up was Great War in the East, and um, I got this in '78 when I first came out. I remember I mowed lawns and earned some money to get the $14 to buy these four games,
Oh,
and
the days.
yeah, that was the good old days. And I loved it because at that time there wasn't a lot on the First World War out, really not. And I didn't have 1914 by Avalon Hill or anything. And I started playing it and I loved it. And I played it and played it and played it and played it and played it like crazy. And I always wondered, because I found it interesting, especially playing the Brussels offensive, I always thought it's really interesting, this Romanian campaign, because you've got all these countries involved. There's all these nationalities. You have Turks, Bulgarians, Hungarians, Austrians, Germans, Romanians, Russians, and you have, to some extent, you've got some French. There was a French mission. There are no counters in the game with them, but you've got all these different nations fighting together and fighting against each other in a very, very big area. And it was really one of the last campaigns where cavalry was really effective. The Germans used it to great effect, and it just really caught my imagination. The scope of it is huge, and it's kind of a bit of a tragedy. I mean, which maybe attracts us a little bit as far as the drama goes. I mean, you've got Romania, who, you know, comes into this war, delays it, doesn't come in probably when they should. They launch this huge offensive and they get defeated very badly. And but then in the end they kind of come out of the ashes again, you know. And actually, I believe, I'm not sure if this is right, but I think Romania actually gained the most territory percentage
Hmm.
wise of any country after the First World War. So it's just kind of an interesting story, and it really caught my imagination. So even when I was in high school, I even made a map. I even have it here somewhere, a really old map with hexagon overlay that I copied on a copy machine, and then I drew on there. It looks terrible, but so you could say I've been working on this game for 40 years, but that would be an exaggeration.
A true passion project then. So when you got serious about it, what kinds of resources did you find to to help build the game? What was your research process like?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, because I would say most of the time, or a lot of the time that's been involved in the game, was research. It hadn't been easy. It really was more work than writing a thesis. Absolutely more work than writing a thesis. I can show you. I put some together for this, and we can talk a little bit about this. So resources, actually, there's quite a lot available, and more has become available over the years. So when we lived in Germany, when I started this, we lived in Wiesbaden, and I only lived about 45. No, about 2 hours away from the military archives in Freiburg. And so the German archives are down there. There's not that much left. A lot of it was destroyed at the end of the Second World War, unfortunately. But I went down there because I had gone there when I was at school. I studied operational military history in school, and I had gone to the archives a couple times, and I wanted to see what they had. And this is kind of an example of this is a German document, but it covers the Austrian First Army, which was the army that was originally in position when the whole campaign started. It gives really good detailed order of battle. And when you go deeper into this, it breaks down everything: manpower, how many machine guns, how many cannons every one of the units have. So the archives in Germany were one, in Freiburg were one source. I also went to Stuttgart. They have a really, really good archives there, and there was a lot I could do there. I got materials out of the Russian archives, the RGVIA. I hired a guy to go initially and look, and then a lot of it comes from the Bulgarian official history, the Romanian official history, the Austro-Hungarian official history, and to some extent the German official history. Just kind of an example. This is another document for this a little bit scary looking document, is from the archives. But what this is these are munitions delivery to all the armies. My armies are down here. This is the 9th Army with Falkenhayn, and this is von Mackensen. And this is kind of how would I say it? These nuts and bolts are basically what's allowed me to make the game the way I could, that I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to wonder. I could really find these black and white figures on, for example, how many munitions or how much munitions they got each month. And this allowed me to build something that was somewhat realistic and help pace the game a lot. Because Gary, the biggest problem we had, or when I first made it and we first tested it, was the Russians and the Romanians just basically overran Transylvania. And I was really surprised kind of at the result. And it was because the pacing hadn't been built into the game, the things that pace the operations. And that would be part of this process. Is what came out of this was really seeing and kind of delving into what it was I felt was important to show on how First World War operations worked, and maybe operations in this theater in particular.
Are there any books you'd care to recommend, like books we could get without driving to the military archives in Stuttgart, about the campaign?
Yeah, I've got one here. I'm glad you asked me, because now I feel really smart that I made this. These two. These are two fairly recent books. I think they're both published in 1912, in 2012 or later. Both of them are excellent, and they're both available, for instance, on Amazon. You can read them on your Kindle or whatever you want to read. Barrett's book is a little tighter on the military aspect of it. Torrey is a scholar, or was a scholar of renown. He unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but I used to call him Mr. Romania, because he's written numerous books on Romania in the First World War. He spoke fluent Romanian, and his book covers the war also with a really good military treatment, but with a little bit more depth about the politics and the personalities and stuff. I can recommend without reservation either of these two books.
Outstanding. Folks, I will put links to the Amazon locations where you can check these books out in the video description.
Okay, no, that would be fantastic. A lot of the play testers are reading these or have read them, and they've kind of always comment on how motivating it is to find a really good, well-written, modern work that gives them a lot of background.
Great, great. So how close were you, now that the game using the Nock Paris system is relatively far along, I think that's a fair statement. How closely were you able to stick to Bernard's original system? Did you have what were the scale of the modifications you had to make to reflect a different campaign in 2 years later?
That's a really, really excellent question. It's really a good, insightful question. We changed it, or I should say, as the designer, that I changed quite a lot. I'll show you just even a graphic here. I apologize for the quality of the Not Paris counter on the right. It didn't. VUCA likes to use these. I don't know what you would say. They're almost like perforated. I don't know what you would call this. The counters have a very nice texture, but they don't copy well. As you can see, it looks kind of like a sandpaper. But so the counters are a little bit different. Some of the essential information you can see that they're related somehow. This is the number of steps. This is basically the manpower or the strength of a unit. The 17 and the 12 here are what is known as a CAB. That's a combat ability. This is a little bit like Mike's morale. You don't track it up and down. It does go up, or it goes down as you flip the counters, as you suffer losses. But one of the main differences in Bertrand's system is you're not tracking this factor by moving it up and down. It's built into the counter. So as you flip the counter, let's say a cap of 17 on the backside might be cap 15. Then when you take another loss, it's cap 12. So it's doing a little bit what Mike's system's doing, but it's built into the counters. Bertrand's got a separate artillery factor here in the middle. It's called ARF or AFF, which is artillery against in normal situations like troop in the open. And then you've got the factor that you use against fortifications. I combine that together. I only have one combat factor, and I made it a little bit different as well in that this is the standard combat factor. There's 26. 21 is if you don't use an ammunition point. It's called their APs, which is also a little different than his system. If you use the minimum or none, you drop down from strength 26 to 21. If you use intense combat, and then you use more munitions or ammunition, you pop up to 31. So one of the biggest ways I would say is, and I don't mean this to be a negative in any way, shape, or form, and this is what the playtesters have told me as well, is that the combat system is much more streamlined than in Nock Paris. But Bertrand designed it the way he did because he was showing more the interaction with the fortifications, fort busting, and his game is really interesting and really shows this. I don't have that environment. There were forts around Bucharest, but because they declared it an open city, I had to make a design decision. Do I put 4 or 5 pages of rules in there with all the overhead for something that might happen? Or do I just say they declared an open city and get rid of all the forts? And I decided to get rid of all the forts.
That's a fair decision in the name of improving the play experience.
Yeah, I just didn't see the point behind it. I had made a version with all the fort counters. And then I really thought about it, and I thought, well, what are we going to do here? Is the player going to be able to say, I don't declare it an open city? This decision is made at the highest levels of government. I'm not sure that's who the player represents. So, one of the other changes, and I'll just touch on this briefly. This is Bertrand's CRT. I don't know if you've seen this before.
I've seen it, but that's it.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting system. You basically got these rolls from -4 to 25. Basically, plus modifiers are bad, negative modifiers are good. You can roll yourself off the chart. So you've got a 20-sided die. You roll, you add combat different combat factors. There's some tactical factors in there, like if you're attacking from more than one hex, you can get a certain flanking bonus and some other things like this. One of the things I changed is that Bertrand has physical flanking. He has facing and physical flanking. I made something which I call synthetic flanking, where I made a system where you count the number of hexes and then you can generate a modifier based on that. It's tough. I had some problems facing the counters in the game. I think when people play on Vassal, then they have absolutely no problem with this at all. But it was something that I decided to do away with. I thought we could do it in a little bit different way. That was also a big change. I use the same CRT because I find it intriguing and interesting, and I love the way it interacts with the terrain. I think it gives a lot of granularity, and you can really make every different type of terrain without overwhelming the players a little bit different. Let's say broken terrain with forest is slightly different than broken terrain without forest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I did was this is the difference between 1914 and 16 is really in 1914, the level of losses were just absolutely catastrophic. And really the only other time in the First World War, I think that the factor with the casualties ever reached the same proportions as in the 1918 offensives, right at the end of the war. So it's something Mike and I also talked about with his system, was that combat in 1914 is really just different than combat in 1916, especially with the veteran armies. The guys on the pointy end of the stick get pretty good at figuring out ways to survive. And so I changed the loss system. The losses are still on the CRT the same way, but basically I've cut them that it's per combat instead of per unit. And this was a pretty big change, because when we first started play testing, what we saw is that units were just getting vaporized off the map. And there aren't a lot of units to begin with in the very beginning of the campaign. And the Romanians, for example, if they got really lucky, were just vaporizing and opening up whole sections of the front. So I changed the loss system. That's another big thing I had to modify. And what I did as well is I did some research. One of the things that was really important was I wanted to figure out what the losses were overall for the campaign. So this is another document here that I got from the archives, and this are the German losses. What basically the circles are is these are dead and these are wounded for the whole campaign, including, by the way, I made a little bit of a mistake here because these losses down here go all the way to they go right to the beginning of 1917, so they're okay. But basically, the Germans lost the equivalent of 4 steps in dead and 17 steps in losses for the entire campaign. Not really a lot. And this is also on the southern front here. So I knew I really needed to change the loss system to try to fit in what was happening historically. So another quite big change.
This sounds fantastic so far to me. So how far along in the design and or development process would you say the game is? Are you getting pretty close, or you still got some additional rounds of play testing and or refinement?
Well, I think the system is stable. And that's what we've been hearing from everybody who's testing. What we're doing right now is scenario development and balancing, and this can take this is really time consuming. what is really difficult, and another game designer friend of mine, David Bolt, who is also a really good World War I designer. He told me when I started, one of the things he said to me is, when you try to make scenarios, you'll be surprised at how much work they take. What is so hard is to basically grab what you know and then try to grab it in the middle of something happening. What's the strength of all the units? Where are they? What is their, it's really, really tough to find that. So right now, what we're working on is just everybody's playing through the system. We're looking for readability of the rules, making sure that they're as accessible as they can be. We're getting a lot of feedback, positive feedback mostly. I would say almost all, and seeing how it plays. Number one. One of the things was, when we had our first run of play testing, we were just a bit unfortunate. I'm not quite sure what happened, but we didn't have a lot of activity. And I think I communicated that, and you had seen that before your show that you did last year. And one of the things also is, I just wanted to know if it was fun. That was a big thing for me. Do people want to play it? Is it fun? Is it burdensome? So I was worried about that, and apparently it is fun. Right now, we're working just on the scenarios. We've got one, I would say, is completed. Another one is well on the way. The campaign game will take a little bit of time. And then we've got a lot of really tiny scenarios that are like 1 or 2 turns for learning and for people to play. Let's say if you want to play a scenario that takes you 45 minutes, something like this. So yeah, what percentage? It's a good question. I mean, the rules are basically done. I have one more section to add. I'm doing rail repair right now, which is actually taking a lot more time than I thought it would. And we have this thing called the Russian commitment table, which the Russians didn't quite do what they promised they were going to do when they said they would support Romania. And I had somebody ask me the other day, what is the biggest factor to the Romanians doing better than they did historically? And my answer was, it depends on how much the Russians support them. So we have something that I put together called a Russian commitment table. And one of the play testers, his name is Federico, helps with this as well a lot. It's not a random chart, but basically it is an events chart which tracks Russian commitment, and different things can affect it either way. And this will be an optional rule that people can play with. If they want to play with the straight thing, we've got the straight Russian commitment, how many reinforcements they got, replacements, ammunition, all this type of stuff. But I wanted to make it more interesting by saying, well, what if they had really supported them a lot more? What would happen? And this took a long time to put together because it's all theoretical. It's yeah. And so, yeah, I don't know, 90%, 85% done. Yeah.
That sounds great. Plus, I've also encouraged that there will be a bunch of scenarios as well. It's always nice to see that, because not everyone has the luxury of a 4x8 foot game table that they can just throw the whole thing down on and play through the campaign right at the beginning. What kind of footprint are we talking about? You had mentioned that there's more front here than anywhere else in the East, at least.
Yeah, the map is pretty big, and VUCA prints 21.5 millimeter hexes, which was a bit of took a bit of change or a bit of adjustment. I was planning on 19. And I know it sounds funny, but when you put a lot of hexes together and you increase them from 19 to 21.5, the map originally was less than 1 meter. And I apologize, I live in Europe, and it fit on my table fine. It's bigger. It's about how big is it? It's 117 centimeters on the biggest measurement. I'm not sure how many inches that it is, and I apologize, but the whole map won't fit on my table. And so Patrick and I talked about this. I had concerns about this because one of the things about the map is we actually cut it down a bit. I can show you this map to show you. This is the original area of the map, and it extended farther to the east here. Covered all of Bessarabia and a bigger chunk of the Russian Empire. And what happened with it is I ended up cutting 4 or 5 hex rows off here to try to get it a little bit smaller. It's bigger, but what we talked about is we formulated a plan to print it in 3 pieces. And so almost all the scenarios you can play on either 1 map or 2 maps. The only one you'll need to play all 3 maps will be the campaign. For instance, Bulgaria Attacks will be 1 map, which will basically be this size. There's another medium-sized map here in the middle. And if you want to play Plan Z, which is the Romanian invasion, you play with these 2 maps. If you want to play the Northern Front, you're only going to be playing with this map, just a really small one. There'll be a little bit of overlap with each one, but Patrick said that's fine. And I think I hope this will solve or help alleviate this, because I'm also very sensitive to this. I mean, I grew up in the States, and when I was a kid, I mean, gaming rooms were no problem, you know. But I live in Europe now, and space is always a problem, at least where we live. And so I'm very, very cognizant and very sensitive of people who say, hey, I don't have that big a table, or I play on the kitchen table, you know. I got it. I really understand.
My wife is going to be very upset for me monopolizing the dining room for the next 6 months in the campaign. That's why we do this in the basement.
Yeah. In Europe, we're really in some parts of Europe we're really challenged. Not a lot of people own houses here, and we actually have a pretty nice size apartment. But even my gaming table is in the corner of my room, my office here, and it's not that big. So it's a bigger game. And to kind of give you I don't know, I don't want to say excuse is the wrong word, but basically what I have to say about this is I've had some people talk to me about this recently as well. And I told them, I'm sorry, there's just nothing more to cut down. You can see for instance, this is the campaign setup. I mean, there's literally counters from the 2 rows up all the way to the last row. There's guys all the way in the east, and there's guys in the first row of the west. There's nothing more to cut down here. You can't orient it a different way. You can't cut it. It's just a huge campaign area.
Well, the map looks, from this graphic, which is admittedly not full resolution, it looks fantastic.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's gone through a lot of changes. I wish I should have scanned in the original one I did when I was like 19 years old or 18 years old and let you see how it's developed. But
that actually would have been fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I have a really ugly version of it, the first one I made, which basically the same thing. I superimposed a hex grid on it, and then I printed it on a little printer and taped it all together. But no, I'm fairly happy with it. One of the things I also changed during the spring when I was kind of working on it all by myself was we kind of had an excess amount of hexside terrain. And I got rid of a lot of it, because I found even though it gave us a lot of granularity on what was going on, it made it too complicated. It was basically you were almost counting the hexides on every time you moved. So you had to say, well, I'm moving in the mountains, but I'm doing this, so it's 18 plus 12. And it got to the point it was kind of driving at least me crazy. So I changed it and simplified it down. And and I mean, VUCA hasn't got to it yet. The art guys haven't got to it yet, and you know they're quite well known for the beauty of the component. Patrick and I have talked about the map. We just talked about it this week, and he likes it the way it is. I kind of said, hey, I think we really do need somebody to go over it, because I'm not a graphics artist. I drew it all, but I'm sure their guys can make it even prettier. How about if I put it that way?
Well, as another non-graphic artist, I'm greatly encouraged that you're not, because that map looks fantastic, as is, in my opinion. And VUCA is really good at that too. So
Yep, they really are. But I do have to say, Patrick has been really, really supportive. And when we talked about it in the very beginning, he said I don't anticipate we're going to be changing much. So we'll see. We'll see. They could have some good ideas. We always have to keep open, yeah. And when we get really close to a project, sometimes we need to take a little bit of a step back. And when somebody has ideas, sometimes at first we're like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then if we think about it, maybe sometimes it makes things better. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I know that you don't have any direct control over the production pipeline, and anything you might say about a release date would be speculative at
Hmm.
this point. But maybe we'll see the finished game in 2027.
Yeah, I think that would be realistic. I would say that if everything keeps going the way it is, that I think we could submit the game by the end of this year or maybe by the spring of next year. We've got a lot of people playing. I really have to say, I don't know what happened, but I guess maybe because we got some people who really said, I want to see this game get published.
Hmm.
We got a great group and just really fun and really active. And wow, you talk about international. We've got a guy from China. We have two Chinese guys. One lives in Europe, one lives in China. We've got some guys from down under who are really funny and really good testers. Guys from the States, guys from Germany, um, guys from Switzerland. Me and Federico lives about an hour away. And so we just picked up a guy. There's a guy from France who is also involved, and so yeah, it's really been fun. And the point being is that if we can keep as active, and if we keep active, then I see it getting submitted by either the end of this year or spring, unless something comes up. What happens after that, I don't know. I don't know what Patrick's got in the production chain.
Sure.
Um, and maybe they find something that maybe will take a little bit more work. Maybe they say, hey, wait a minute, we want to do something with the map or whatever.
Well, that's fair enough. But I, for one, am very excited to see this. This is did not play any of the Great War of the East games. As a kid, I would have been about 8 when the quad came out, at least.
Yeah.
And I still have not. I've played some of the other old quads since then, but not this one. And there's not very many games on World War One East Front
there there
overall.
are there are I mean, well, there's some, and there's
There are
some,
some.
yeah, there's some that kind of get, I think, a little bit overlooked. Ted Bracere's had some pretty
Hmm.
good games. Um, I'm trying to think of all the ones. Der Weltkrieg, of course, has a
Hmm.
big variety of games and a lot of scenarios. And they also actually have a game on Romania.
Hmm.
I played it briefly. I hadn't played it a lot. When I first started, I played it with a friend in Germany when I was living in Germany. But and there's some other games out there too that are a little bit more obscure. There's a Polish designer that made a game on Tannenberg, and I've only seen it. I don't have it. I saw it online, and I downloaded the rules and tried to translate some of it from Polish. It didn't work really well, but yeah, there aren't a lot of Eastern Front First World War games. Um, I think part of it is it can be research.
Mm.
This has been really daunting, and I really, the majority of I would say 10 years or more that I've been working on this was spent absolutely nugging through archival files. For instance, the order battle and the arrival of the Russian units is really super critical in the game. There's no definitive list printed of when the Russians arrived or even how they arrived. And that's the big thing is, so somebody says all these corps got there. Okay, that's great. But how did they get there? Some of them were delivered by sea from Odessa. Some came by rail and some marched onto the north end of the map. And well, it took forever to figure that out. I
Mhm.
really have to tell you, it really took years to figure all that out.
Well, you're going to have a fine PhD dissertation out of it by the end, is what it sounds like. You've gone to a ton of primary sources,
Yeah.
which I'm always impressed by as
Well,
somebody with some historical training.
it it is really interesting how you can find what you need to find. And for instance, on the Russians coming in, I'll throw this up because we can look at this graphic while I drone on. This is a Russian map that I downloaded, and it's very typical. They publish these, I think, every 6 or 7 days. Very, 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 very detailed. Shows all the units, who's where. This is the Seventh Army. These are the different corps. These are the divisions, and it even breaks it down sometimes into brigades or even sometimes into regiments. But when I was trying to figure out how the guys arrived, I couldn't figure out how to do it. I couldn't figure out what would be the way to do this. So what I did was I looked at the corps, then I looked at the division, then I broke it down into regiments, and then I went and looked at the regimental histories, and I looked for the dates when I thought they had arrived, and then for sure there was always a reference. We landed in Constanza by ship on this day, and I'm like, okay, they arrived by ship on this day. That division's done. What about the other division? And again, it's amazing what you can come up with, but boy, does it take a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Well, clearly it has in this particular case. The designers of American Civil War games who live in Virginia have no idea what this level of trouble is what it sounds like to me. You've also how many of the languages do you speak from the source documents or can read?
So German is okay. My wife is German, so it was a really good idea for me to bone up on my German, and we lived in Germany.
Good strategy.
Yeah, that works out really well. And we lived in Germany for 10 years. I studied German in school, and then we've lived in Switzerland, the German-speaking part of Switzerland now, for 10 years as well. So German, my French is okay. It's not the best. And then these other languages, I would say, like with Russian, I can speak order of battle Russian. And what I've really found that is really helpful, well, number one, some people have helped me. One of my clients' father was in the Russian military as a colonel, and she and I were just talking, and I had just mentioned that I was doing something history related, and she's helped me actually a lot. And she's like, oh, I find this so interesting that you're looking at this, and she helps out. With the Romanian stuff, what I did is I scanned in, or I have a copy of the official history in PDF. And when I started, there was no way other to do it than to look and then look for references and then take it out and then run it through a translator. But one of the things that has really revolutionized this is Notebook LM. And I cannot sing the praises of Notebook LM too much, because what you can do is, let's say you want to learn when did, for example, it doesn't work, but you say, I want to know when all the Russian corps arrived. And you've got all these Russian documents. Instead of having to sift through them and literally look for 15th Corps, 18th Corps, you can dump them in the Notebook LM, and then you can just ask it. And you'll say, give me a summary. What do these sources say about when these units arrived? And because language is no problem for it, it will come out it'll give you a summary of this. And then what's so great about Notebook LM is it gives you the reference, and then you can go look to make sure that it's not full of crap.
Hallucinating, yes.
Yes, exactly. And telling you, well, Hitler arrived in 1916 in Romania. And you're like, hey, wait a minute, I don't think so. And that, I really have to say, using that it's only been about the last 6 months, but boy, I wish I would have had it 10 years ago.
I bet, yeah.
Something that would have taken me 2 weeks to do before I can do in a couple of hours, easy. And you can get it all stored in there. The sources are all there. And then you can ask it very, very interesting questions. interrelationships, and it will find stuff that you can miss just out of fatigue when you looked at 200 pages of something.
Mm-hmm.
It,
I'm
it
actually currently experimenting with Notebook LM for a completely different reason, and I'm, sometimes the user needs to kind of adjust to the AI's mode of operation. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. You have to be careful. You have to double check everything. But one of the things it can really do, which it seems to do very well, is with languages. That
Mm-hmm.
it really does well. You can. I took a Russian manual the other day, which I found really, really interesting because it was about march distances and the effects of weather, the effects of terrain. And again, it's something that if I would have done the way I did it 5 years ago, it would have taken me probably a day or two to go all the way through it. And I dumped it into Notebook LM and said, make me a table of the marching speeds of infantry in different types of weather and different types of terrain based on this information. And 35 seconds later, it dumped out a table with, snow, da 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 da, mud, so and so, and
Mm-hmm.
it is for a game designer, as long as you double check it and make sure it's okay. Good grief, the amount of data you can get out of this is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, these tools are just going to get more and more powerful as time goes on, too. So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, that's for sure. Um, yeah, so would you like to see? I mean, what can I show you? What would you like to see?
well, what else did you put in the slideshow that we haven't seen yet? I know there's some closer images of the map.
Yeah, there is. Oh, that's a research map. That's the wrong one. Let me.
Even the research map looks fantastic.
Yeah, this is how I tried to figure out how rail repair worked, and this is what I've been doing the last week. I took the map, I printed it, and then of course, this is my plexi over the top, and I used
Mhm.
a erase marker, and I was trying to figure out how in the world the Germans could keep in supply when they were advancing so fast. And this is kind of the result. And so this helped me build my rules. I really had to come up with something with the repair, but it's just kind of an example. Let me get up here and get you. This is kind of, I mean, this is kind of an interesting one. This is building a scenario. This is building the Plan Z scenario. And this kind of shows the amount of work that has to go in it. Is this, the lines here are the phase lines.
Mhm.
So phase one is green, yellow, red, and then this is where they wanted to gather and go on. If we zoom in a little bit closer, you'll see there's geo objectives. So I've dropped the geo objectives that each of the armies had, and I want to see how they can reach them, if they can reach them, and how they can stand up to it. On the other side, you've got the very, very thinly spread Austrians, Austro-Hungarians, excuse me, and then the blue guys, of course, are the Romanians. And at the beginning, they're all broken down into regiments because that's how they actually deployed. And I found by deploying them the way that they did historically, the game started playing historically,
Mm.
and they build up into brigades later. Let me, I think, is it here? Nope, that's the same one again. Um, this is the Bulgaria attack scenario. These are the Bulgarians here. Really big, huge divisions. Well, the divisions are actually corps, but I mean, some of these divisions had 28 battalions at a time when a German division had 9.
Mm.
So I treat them like corps in the game because, for all intents and purposes, they are. This is them poised to go across the border, and they want to attack these fortified positions here. 1, 2, and then the end goal of this is to take Constanza, which is the Romanians' main port on the Black Sea, where they expected to get support from the Russians, who are up here, by the way, and a couple of airplanes on there as well. Nobody's played with the air so far, but it's going to be optional as well. So, yeah, can show you a little bit some scary looking charts. This is the weather table. This is how you produce the weather in the game. This is based on the historical weather patterns, based on around 1900 through 1910. And so what I did is I broke them down by elevation. So these match with the terrain on the map. The mountains go from low to alpine, and you basically roll for temperature. You get a factor of like warm, mild, cold, and then you get precipitation from light to heavy, and you can have a storm. And putting these together then produces other weather. This looks really scary, I know as well, but it works. I call this the weather machine, and basically you cross-reference the temperature with the type of precipitation, and then you go down here and you have a ground conditions track. This is very reminiscent of Gauss, and Gauss, their conditions track was my inspiration for this down here. You move it back and forth. It's like granimals for weather. You just follow the arrows. If there's an arrow, you move it. If not, and you can do the weather. It takes literally 30 seconds to do a turn.
I might be stealing this idea for a completely different application. I'll have you know. I like this.
Yeah,
this actually reminds me of the weather system from an RPG, actually, which is the Harn material from Columbia Games, which does kind of track temperature and precipitation independently. And like a few war games do. Certainly we have ground conditions in BCS as well.
Yeah.
What we just call it traceability, or I forget what they call it in BCS actually, because I haven't played it in a year. But no, this to me, this does not look intimidating, but some people might find it scary. I've seen scarier.
What I've really found, and what has been really interesting from the testing, and this you learn a lot. And what is interesting is that people will look at things and it's almost like they freeze. And especially when it's not something that is normal to war gamers. And I think somebody made a comment about Bertrand's game in your thing yesterday, that what Bertrand is showing is not strange. He's just presented it in some ways that war gamers aren't normally seeing the things. And so what do you call this? Do you call this strange, or you call it innovative? I think I would call it more innovative. He's got some really interesting ideas. When people see something like this that they've never seen before, their first thing is, oh my God, is that so complicated? And then when they kind of look at the rules, and the thing is, the rules are written for the ergonomics. The big thing is, and one thing when you test on Vassal, and everybody's playing on Vassal, is people sometimes forget that you are writing the rules for people to play the physical copy of the game. So when you say, take the marker and slide it over one, if there's an arrow, slide it over here, place them all in the first column. If people really follow the step-by-step instructions, generally it works, unless you've got a problem. And then you need to fix it, of course. But people do tend to spend a lot of time staring at this. How about if I put it that way? Yeah. This is rail movement. So this was a really big part of the game as well, and it's changed a lot. I simplified it a bunch. It was super complicated in the beginning, but you do the rail movement. You track it on the map, or you plot it on the map, but all the rail movement occurs, I know this sounds weird, it occurs on the game turn track. So you've got a fog of war aspect that you play Twilight in the East, and the typical thing is you say, okay, you've got this many rail movement points and each one costs 1/3, and then you're like 1, 2, 3, 45, 46, 47, 48. And what I did is I just kind of transferred that whole process up here by using time, and distance, of course, are the hexes. And it took me a couple of years to figure this out. I kind of figured out that if you just do it here, you can do it on the game turn thing, and you count the number of hexes. All you have to do is you say, I'm moving from here to here. You count the hexes one time, you make a note of it, you come back here, you count, and then you put the unit here, and the game turn is on. It comes in as a normal reinforcement in the rail arrival phase. So This is also a little bit different, but some guys have used it. They said they found it very easy to use. So, so far,
Looks like it to me.
Yeah.
I can tell you that it was in Twilight in the East. It was sometimes challenging to keep track of all the variables, particularly when you might have multiple units moving to different destinations on different railroads at the same time.
Yeah.
And there's like different movement rates depending on whether it's a double line or single line railroad too. So is that something that we had to deal with historically in this campaign, was multiple rail gauges?
Yeah, not the gauges so much, but definitely so here's another crazy looking graphic. This is kind of how I double checked myself on what was going on with the rail lines. These are all the rail lines in the game, and they're color coded from blue, which is double track, down to green is high capacity, yellow or gold or whatever is medium, and red is low, and black are the small gauge railways. There are these Russian lines are a different gauge than the Romanians, but it doesn't make any difference because the Russians all come up and land up around here. If they want to try to move on the Romanian rail system, they can, but they have to march down to a Romanian what we call in training place, and they count on the Romanian capacity. So not a lot of difference in the gauges, but a lot more granularity in the types of rail. But this was absolutely necessary because basically the rail net here. So you're dealing with Southeastern Europe in the beginning of the 20th century. The rail net, even though it's quite dense, is not anything like the rail net in France or anywhere like that. And these rail nets really drove the way that the campaign went. And so really, rail was so critical in the First World War, and I'm sure you picked that up playing Mike's game. And when you're dealing with an area where things are not developed as much, then it becomes even more critical because it just absolutely shapes where everybody's going to go and how fast they can go and what they can supply.
Yes, I was just about to insert that. I mean, it's not like the Western Front where you want to go to the front, you can just take a taxi. So
they actually had a taxi. They had a taxi incident. No kidding. And I know this sounds funny. When the Bulgarians came across the border and they realized that they were going to attack this fortified position here, which they called Verdun on the Danube. They reinforced this with the 15th Division, and some of them moved by taxi from Bucharest down to here. They also used buses. So the Romanians don't want to be outdone by the taxis of the Marne. They have the taxis of Turtucaia. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to include it in the game, but they did move a significant amount of men by taxi.
All right, Paul. I think we've exhausted the endurance of the viewers.
Absolutely.
With our hour-plus interview. I have very little to shave off the beginning or end of this, so I want to say this 1916 Prelude to Blitzkrieg, I've been wanting to see it for years. What you have said about it makes me even more encouraged, and because VUCA is putting it out, I'm sure that the components and the map graphics will end up being spectacular, regardless of what state they're in right now. And right now, they look really good. So I want to say thanks for coming on to talk about this, and I will be sure to let folks know when this becomes actually available from VUCA, because I'll be buying it when that happens.
Well, thanks a lot, and I really appreciate you taking the time and the effort to have me on the show. It's a pleasure to talk about it. And one thing I just want to say is I really want to thank the guys who are helping with the testing. One of the things I've learned is you absolutely can't do something like this on your own. And you can, it's Kevin Costner said, if you build it, they will come. If you build it and nobody comes, it's hard to test it. And I really, really appreciate the enthusiasm and the fun that these guys in the group that we have now are bringing. So I just want to say thank you to all of them.
Fantastic. Paul, once again, thanks so much. And thanks
Yeah.
everybody for watching.